That's my daughter's ring." The words came out before Elspeth Dunbar could stop them. Sharp and thin, like something breaking under pressure. Her voice cut through the squeak of a mop bucket and the distant hum of an overhead light, and the woman pushing the cart stopped. She was young, younger than Elspeth had expected, maybe 35, maybe 40, with dark hair pinned back under a cap and tired eyes that carried the particular weight of someone who worked long hours on hard floors. Her uniform was pale blue, the cuffs worn thin at the wrists. She held a mop like it had become an extension of herself. And there on her right hand, catching the fluorescent light from the hallway ceiling, was a ring. A sapphire ring, oval stone, delicate gold band, custom made, one of a kind. Elspeth had ordered it 11 years ago from a jeweler on Bloor Street in Toronto as a birthday gift for her daughter Brynn. She had watched the man engrave the inside of the band herself. BD, April 4. Elspeth had not seen that ring since the morning. Brynn walked out of the Dunbar family house in Rosedale and never came back. The cleaning woman looked down at her hand, then back up. "I'm sorry?" "That ring." Elspeth stepped closer, her heels clicking against the tile. She was 68 years old and had spent 4 decades building Dunbar Pharma from a single borrowed office into one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in Canada. She had spoken in boardrooms and in courtrooms. She had buried her husband and signed 100 documents written in the cold language of grief. She was not a woman who fell apart easily. But her hands were shaking now, and she could not make them stop. "Where did you get it?" The woman's expression shifted. Not guilt, something closer to confusion and the particular defensiveness of someone who had been looked at sideways too many times. "I found it," she said. "Years ago. I'm not a thief." Beside Elspeth, her husband's brother cleared his throat. Harlan Dunbar was 54 and wore his suits the way men wore armor. Precisely, expensively, without a single wrinkle. He had managed the company's board operations since Elspeth's husband died 6 years ago. And he had the habit of making every room feel slightly smaller than it was. "Elspeth," he said quietly, "you're in a hospital, let's not." "Harlan," she didn't look at him, "be quiet." The cleaning woman's name, Elspeth would learn, was Dara Mackinnon. She had worked at St. Marguerite's Medical Center for 7 years, arriving early and leaving late, the kind of employee whose absence got noticed but whose presence mostly didn't. She stood there in the corridor with her mop and her worn cuffs, and looked at Elspeth the way people looked at things that were too large to understand all at once. "I found it at the side of a road," Dara said. Her voice was steady but her knuckles had gone white around the mop handle. "On the 400 just past Barrie, there'd been an accident, a car in the ditch. I stopped because I saw the hazard lights." The corridor was quiet for a moment. "When?" Elspeth asked. 9 years ago. Last week of October, it was snowing." The last week of October 9 years ago. Elspeth felt something inside her chest move, not break, exactly. Shift the way ice shifts when the temperature drops 1 degree past the point it can hold. Brynn had disappeared on the 22nd of October, 9 years ago. Harlan's hand came to Elspeth's elbow. "We should let security handle this properly." His voice was smooth and reasonable, the voice he used when he wanted to be obeyed without anyone realizing they were being managed. She could have bought it online. She could have found it anywhere. "This isn't the place." Dara's chin lifted. "I know how this looks, I know what you're thinking. Woman like me, ring like this." She glanced at Harlan, then back at Elspeth. "I've thought about turning it in 100 times. I never knew who it belonged to. I never knew how to find out, but I swear to you, I did not steal it." Elspeth looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she looked at the woman wearing it. Not at her clothes or her work cart or her worn-down shoes, at her face. There was something about the steadiness in it. The kind of steadiness that came not from confidence but from endurance. From a life spent doing necessary things without recognition. That made Elspeth think of Brynn. Brynn at 22. Working summers at a diner on Queen Street West because she wanted to know what it felt like to earn her own money. Brynn, who had always made herself smaller than she was. Because she didn't want anyone to think her mother's name had made her soft. "Come with me," Elspeth said. Harlan exhaled. "You cannot be serious." "Tell her supervisor she's needed elsewhere for the afternoon." Elspeth turned and walked toward the elevator without waiting. "And Harlan, do not call anyone, not yet." She heard him say her name once more, low and warning, and she chose not to hear it. The private consultation room on the 4th floor had been arranged by the hospital administrator in under 10 minutes. The name, Dunbar, had that effect, and now it was just the two of them. Elspeth in a chair by the window, and Dara Mackinnon sitting across from her with both hands folded in her lap, the sapphire catching the pale November light. "You said you stopped at the accident," Elspeth said. "Tell me what you saw." Dara was quiet for a moment, the way people were quiet when they were deciding how much of the truth they could trust a stranger with. Then she began. "A single car," she said. "Gone off the road into a shallow ditch, driver's side caved in, windshield cracked but not shattered. She had pulled over because no one else was stopping, And because that was the kind of person she was, the kind who stopped. The driver was a young woman, conscious when Dara reached the window, badly hurt. There was blood on her forehead and her breathing came fast and wrong. Elspeth's hands went still in her lap. The young woman had grabbed Dara's arm through the broken window, Dara said. She was trying to say something and it took 3 tries before Dara understood. There was a baby in the back seat, strapped into an infant carrier 8 weeks old, unhurt somehow, crying. Elspeth closed her eyes. She made me take him, Dara said, and her voice had gone quieter now, stripped of its earlier defensiveness, carrying only the weight of the thing itself. She kept saying, take him, please just take him. I told her the ambulance was coming, I could hear it already. She said it didn't matter. She said take him and don't tell anyone who he is, she said please. The room held the weight of those words. Elspeth opened her eyes, and you took him? Dara nodded once, slow. I called 911 from my car. I told them about the woman, the accident, the location. I gave them everything, but She stopped, started again. I didn't tell them about the baby. I don't know why, or maybe I do. She'd asked me. She'd looked at me and asked me. I couldn't undo that. Where is he now? Elspeth asked. For the first time since they'd sat down, something changed in Dara's face. Something that had nothing to do with fear or defensiveness. Home, she said. With my neighbor. He's 8. He thinks he's mine. 8 years old. A baby 8 weeks old in October 9 years ago. The arithmetic was simple and it landed with the force of everything Elspeth had spent 9 years refusing to stop believing. What did you name him? Dara looked at her steadily. Liam. Elspeth had not become what she was by moving slowly. By that evening she had contacted her personal attorney, an investigative firm she had used twice before, and the lead registrar at the hospital where the accident victim from the 400 had been brought 9 years ago. She had also very quietly asked her household staff to prepare a second guest room. Harlan came to the house at 9 o'clock. She heard him let himself in with his key, a habit she had never thought to correct until now, and she waited for him in the study. Elspeth, he sat without being invited. Whatever you're thinking, I need you to stop. What am I thinking? You're thinking this woman is some kind of sign. That this is Brynn somehow. Some extension of Brynn. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression arranged into something carefully gentle. We went through this after the accident. The police confirmed the identification from her ID. There was a medical file. You saw the reports yourself. There was no body, Elspeth said. Harlan was quiet for a half-second too long. There was significant trauma, he said finally. The conditions. There was no body, Harlan. Elspeth held his gaze. I said it at the time and I said it for 3 years afterward, and every person around me told me I was grieving, that I was holding on, that I needed to let her go. She set down the glass of water she'd been holding. But the ring exists, and the child exists. And the woman who found both of them at the side of a road in a snowstorm exists. So I would like you to explain to me why those 3 facts shouldn't make me ask questions. Something moved through Harlan's eyes. Not grief, not confusion. Something she recognized now, looking back through 9 years of small moments as management. The management of her expectations, of what she was allowed to believe. I'm protecting you, he said. From what? From another heartbreak. He said it smoothly, but his left hand, resting on his knee, pressed down just slightly harder than it needed to. You built something extraordinary, Elspeth. Brynn is gone, that's a tragedy I carry too. But you don't need a stranger's story reopening what took years to close. What you mean, Elspeth said, is that I don't need to find out whether Brynn left a son behind, whether that son has a claim. She kept her voice even. Whether the line of inheritance you've been managing for 6 years changes. The room was very quiet. Harlan smiled. It was a small smile, controlled, and it did not go anywhere near his eyes. That's an ugly thing to say. Then tell me it isn't true. He didn't. The investigative firm worked fast. By the following morning, they had pulled what remained of the hospital intake records from that night 9 years ago. The files were incomplete, sections missing, a nurse transfer that hadn't been properly documented, a record of an unidentified woman admitted for critical head injuries, who had been transferred to a different facility within 24 hours, and whose subsequent records appeared, simply to end. Elspeth's attorney spread the documents on the kitchen table, while Elspeth stood over them with her reading glasses on, and her coffee going cold beside her. Someone cleaned these, the attorney said. She was a compact woman named Iris Vachon who had worked with Elspeth for 15 years and had never once been dramatic without cause. She was not being dramatic now, not destroyed, that would have been flagged, but stripped. The kind of stripping that takes money and access and patience. Elspeth touched the edge of one page, a transfer form. The destination facility had been partially redacted with what looked like a correction stamp. Something someone had pressed down hard enough to leave an impression in the paper. Can you read what's underneath? Iris held it under a lamp. Or Pinehurst. 3 phone calls later they had it. Pinehurst Palliative, a private facility outside of Aurelia. Now closed, records archived. It took 2 more days to find the record they were looking for. A woman admitted under the name Jane Merritt, a name Elspeth had never heard. Severe traumatic brain injury. No next of kin listed. No identification recovered from the scene. The woman had lived for 11 days after being transferred, and had died on the 3rd of November without ever regaining full consciousness. The date of birth on the file was April 4th. The same as the engraving inside the ring. The same as Brynn's birthday. Elspeth sat down. She sat down in the archive office of a closed facility on a folding chair with linoleum under her feet, and she put her face in her hands and she breathed. Someone had moved her daughter to a private facility, and let her die without a name. She did not go to Harlan, not yet. There was a man who had been the Dunbar family's estate solicitor for 30 years. A quiet, almost invisible man named Walter Foss, who had retired to the Kawarthas and spent his days fishing and not answering most calls. Elspeth drove up herself, 4 hours from the city, and found him in his dock chair with a thermos of tea, and the particular piece of someone who had been waiting to be found. I wondered when you'd come, Walter said, without turning around. She sat beside him. The lake was still. Tell me what you know. He told her. 6 years ago, shortly after Elspeth's husband passed, Harlan had asked Walter to review the terms of the estate structure in the event of Brynn's death having been formally confirmed. Standard procedure, he had said. Closure. Elspeth had been too deep in grief to be involved in administrative matters, and so it had been Walter and Harlan, and the company's internal legal team in a room in the Bay Street office, going through numbers and succession plans with the efficient detachment of men who understood that money did not stop moving just because people did. But then Harlan had asked about grandchildren. He had asked specifically whether a grandchild whose existence was unknown to the family could make a legal claim on the estate at a later date. Hypothetically, as a matter of estate planning. Walter had answered honestly, yes, a biological grandchild could claim. DNA evidence would be sufficient. He got very quiet after that, Walter said. I thought it was grief. That kind of question often comes from grief. People trying to understand all the possible futures at once. He looked out at the water. But I've had 6 years to think about it, and I don't think it was grief. Elspeth thought about her daughter, lying unnamed in a facility outside of Aurelia while her brother-in-law sat in her father's office and asked questions about inheritance law. He needed Brynn to stay dead, she said, and he needed her son to stay nobody. Walter nodded slowly. I think he found out she'd had the baby. I don't know how, but if he knew and the child existed, and Brynn was already in a facility, then removing her from the record was the next logical step. The baby had already been separated from her at the scene. No one had connected them. All he had to do was let the paperwork disappear. Elspeth looked out at the lake for a long time. Then she asked Walter one more question. Would you be willing to testify to that conversation? I've been willing for 6 years, he said. I was just waiting for someone to ask. She brought Dara Mackinnon and Liam to the house on a Thursday. The boy was small for 8, with dark eyes and a serious mouth, and the way of moving through unfamiliar spaces that children had when they were used to being careful, taking in details, checking exits, not reaching for things without permission. He wore a red puffer jacket with a broken zipper that Dara had pinned closed with a safety pin. He stood in the entrance hall of the Dunbar house in Rosedale, and looked up at the ceiling with the expression of someone who had never considered that rooms came that large. Elspeth crouched down to his level. You must be Liam, she said. He looked at her with those serious eyes. You have a lot of paintings, he said. I do, she smiled despite herself. Do you like paintings? He considered this with the gravity of someone who was not going to answer a question without thinking it through first. Some of them are sad, he said finally. The ones with the dark sky. Elspeth thought of Brynn at 7. Standing in this same entrance hall and saying that the painting above the staircase made her feel like rain. Elspeth had not understood then. She had not understood a lot of things about her daughter until it was too late. Yes, she said quietly, they are. She stood and met Dara's eyes over the boy's head. Dara was watching her with the careful, braced expression of someone prepared for things to go wrong. Elspeth understood it. She had done enough to earn that expression. She and everyone else who existed in rooms like these, who never thought to wonder what it cost to be invisible in them. I want to do a DNA test, Elspeth said, if you're willing. Dara nodded. I figured you would. She paused. I want to know too. I've wanted to know for 8 years. The results came back in 9 days. Liam was Brynn's son. Elspeth read the report 3 times in the early morning, sitting alone at the kitchen table, with the window above the sink going gray with dawn. She read the numbers and the clinical language and the confirmation, And she thought about a young woman on a highway in a snowstorm who had pressed her son into the arms of a stranger and said please. She thought about what it meant to trust someone when you had nothing left to offer them, and no reason to expect anything in return. And she thought about Dara Mackinnon, who had said nothing for 9 years, who had kept the ring because she didn't know who to give it to, who had raised someone else's child in a 2-bedroom apartment in Barrie, and worked double shifts on hospital floors, and never once sought credit for any of it, who had simply quietly kept going. Elspeth picked up the phone and called her attorney. Then she called the investigative firm. Then she called a journalist she knew at the Globe and Mail. Not to leak, not yet, but to make sure that someone outside the family understood that what was coming was real and documented, and would not disappear into paperwork the way Brynn had. Harlan arrived at the house that afternoon, without an invitation. Elspeth was in the study. She had arranged everything on the desk: the archive records, the transfer forms, the estate correspondence, the transcript of Walter Foss's notarized statement, the DNA results, and at the center of it all, the photograph of the Pinehurst intake form with April 4, typed in the space-marked date of birth. Harlan looked at the desk, then at her. The careful gentleness he had worn for years was gone. Was underneath it was not what she had expected. Not coldness, not cruelty, something smaller and more exhausted. Something that looked almost like relief, that the weight of it was finally being set down, somewhere visible. I didn't hurt her, he said. You let her die without her name. She was already dying. His voice thinned. The injury was unsurvivable. They told me that when I called, she was going to die regardless. He looked at the photograph of the intake form. I only made it quieter. You made it disappear, Elspeth said. Because she had a son. Because a grandson changed everything that came to you after my husband died. She felt her voice steady itself the way it steadied before the most important sentences. You moved her to a private facility so there would be no record connecting her to the child. So Liam would have no mother on paper. So Brynn would have no name. Harlan said nothing. And then you sat across from me for 9 years at family dinners and board meetings, and let me believe I had no one left. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He just stood in her study with his hands at his sides, and the portrait of her husband on the wall behind him. And he looked the way men sometimes looked when they finally understood that managing a situation was not the same as controlling it. I have a grandson, Elspeth said. He's 8 years old. His name is Liam. He pinned his jacket closed with a safety pin this morning because his zipper is broken. She stood up from behind the desk. You're going to resign from the board before the end of the week. Your attorney and mine will discuss the rest. Harlan's jaw tightened. And if I don't? Walter Foss will speak on the record. The investigative firm has already submitted a referral to the Financial Crimes Unit. The journalist at the Globe understands that this story exists and is waiting for my call. She looked at him steadily. I have been patient for 9 years, Harlan. I am done being patient. He left without another word. She stood at the window and watched his car move down the driveway and through the gate and out onto the street, and she thought, this is what it looks like when silence finally breaks. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a door closing on something that should have ended long ago. 3 weeks later, Elspeth sat in Dara Mackinnon's kitchen in Barrie. It was a small kitchen. Bright, in the particular way of spaces where someone has worked hard to make the most of what they have. Yellow curtains, a plant on the windowsill, a child's drawing held to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a moose. The table had a scratch along one leg and 4 mismatched chairs, and a fruit bowl with 2 apples and an orange in it. Liam was in the other room doing homework. Elspeth could hear the occasional huff of frustration that meant multiplication tables. Dara set a mug of tea in front of her and sat down without ceremony. I'm not taking him from you, Elspeth said. Dara looked at her. I know that, she said. But her hands tightened around her own mug anyway. He has a grandmother who didn't know he existed until 3 weeks ago, Elspeth said. And he has a mother who kept him safe for 8 years when she didn't have to. She paused. I would like to know him. I would like him to know where he came from, what his mother was like. She felt her throat tighten and let it. Brynn would have liked you. I think she already knew that, when she made the choice she made. Dara looked down at her tea. She held my hand, she said quietly, through the window just for a second. She was so cold. She looked up. I've thought about her every single day since. Elspeth reached across the table and covered Dara's hand with her own. From the other room came a triumphant sound. The particular sound of a child who has finally gotten the answer right. Mum, Liam called. 6 times 7 is 42, right? Dara smiled, the first full Elspeth had seen from her, open and unguarded. Right? She called back. Yes. A pencil hitting the floor in celebration. Elspeth laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, the kind that came from somewhere she had thought was closed. She looked at the ring on Dara's hand, the sapphire, the gold band, BD April 4 engraved inside. Dara had kept it on. Elspeth had not asked her to remove it, she did not intend to. Some things were not about possession. Some things were about the thread that ran through them. The invisible line connecting a woman on a snowy highway, to a kitchen in Barrie, to a Rosedale study, to a boy who thought paintings could look like rain. The ring had not been lost, it had been carried. Through 9 years of hard floors and double shifts, and a child's drawings held to the fridge with a moose-shaped magnet. It had been carried by someone who didn't know what it meant, but understood in the way the body sometimes understood things the mind hadn't named yet, that it was worth keeping. That was the lesson Elspeth carried home with her that evening, driving south on the 400, as the November dark came down over the highway. Not about wealth, not about inheritance or legal claims or the long justice of documents finally brought into the light. The lesson was simpler than any of that. The people the world steps around are often carrying exactly what the world has been missing. And the ones who stop, who pull over in a snowstorm when no one else does, are the ones who end up holding what matters most. Elspeth drove and let the dark settle around her, and for the first time in 9 years, the silence felt like something she could live inside.